Have you ever felt that you are always alone, watching so many people being raised with support and guided before they lose their way, while you look back and realize you have no support at all? No one stands behind you, no one points the way, and no one tells you that you are on the right path. So day after day you quietly blame life and your own fate. But what if this is not misfortune, and is instead the very opportunity to create your most remarkable successes? For Carl Jung, the void of loneliness is the starting point of a process he called individuation. When all external structures disappear and no guiding voice remains, you are forced to build a self that is not borrowed from anyone. The moment you learn to cross mountains alone and rivers alone is also the moment you unlock the inner power long hidden deep within you. So today's video is a gift for the solitary soul learning to find success on your own 2 feet. Together, we will walk through valuable lessons seen through Jung's lens and come to realize that every strength you have searched for has long resided within your soul, waiting for you to recognize it and move toward the victories of your life, learning to be alone without fearing loneliness. For Carl Jung, loneliness is not a sentence imposed on your inner life, but a phase of deep restructuring of the self. In many symbolic traditions, this state is known as the night sea journey, a passage across the dark ocean in which you leave behind every familiar support in order to observe yourself, orient yourself, and take responsibility for your own direction. This is not abandonment, but a transition in which old structures no longer sustain you, compelling you to build a foundation from within. Being alone is not the same as being isolated. Isolation is being cut off from connection, while being alone, in Jung's view, is a conscious choice to reclaim psychological energy to its center. In modern life, you constantly expend libido maintaining social roles, instant responses, and the image of the persona. When those interactions fall away, that energy no longer disperses outward, but returns inward, creating the conditions for a deeper awareness of yourself. Consider a woman I once knew after her divorce, whose sorrow was at first softened by friends and family. As those sources of comfort receded, she was forced to face her emotions directly. Instead of seeking fulfillment from the outside, she began to write, to read, and to name feelings that had never been acknowledged, until she realized what she truly needed and began to rebuild her inner life with intention. Jung called this an encounter with the self, the moment when you no longer run from yourself, but return to understand yourself honestly. As Jung once said, loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. A person may stand in a crowd and still feel lonely if they must constantly suppress their true thoughts. Yet when you are alone and fully in dialogue with your inner world, that state is no longer loneliness, but a space of healing. In this quiet, you begin to see how many of your goals were never truly yours, but borrowed expectations from family, society, or the fear of being left behind. Success does not begin with being supported, but with the ability to take full responsibility for your inner life, and this only forms when no one stands behind you. Being alone forces you to develop intuition and to read the signals from within, like someone lost in a forest without a map, at first overwhelmed, but gradually learning to navigate through subtle signs. So walking without anyone beside you is not a disadvantage. You may be entering a phase Jung considered essential for growth, where you are not affirmed and not supported, but given something rare, the chance to live without a mask. Stop fearing and dare to walk through the darkness of the soul. For Jung, darkness is not something to eliminate, but the unconscious part of yourself, made of impulses, emotions, and desires you once pushed away because they did not fit the image you wished to maintain. When support is present, you have a buffer zone that lets you avoid confronting these parts. But when no one remains behind you, you have no choice but to face yourself directly. It is here that the journey of winning in life truly begins, not on the outside, but in the depths of the inner world. The difference between those who move forward and those who remain stuck does not lie in whether they have a shadow, but in how they respond when it appears. When emotions such as envy, anger, or fear arise, the natural reaction is to deny or suppress them, and that reaction keeps you under unconscious control. Jung believed that whatever is not made conscious will return as fate. This means that if you do not face your true inner drives, they will quietly shape your decisions and your direction without your awareness. That is why many people, despite their efforts, cannot achieve victory, not because they lack ability, but because they are guided by unseen forces within themselves. When there is no one left to rely on, you develop a crucial skill, shifting from reaction to awareness. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" you begin to ask, "What is this revealing about me?" So an emotion is no longer something to eliminate, but a signal to decode, and discomfort with others becomes a mirror reflecting parts of yourself you have yet to accept. The paradox is that the very parts you once wanted to discard contain the strongest energy for your growth. Ambition, the need for recognition, and anger at injustice will erode you from within if suppressed, but if recognized and directed, they become a clear and consistent driving force. As Jung stated, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You cannot build a solid life by focusing only on the light, but must begin by understanding what is operating in your darkness. This process is not about defeating the shadow, but learning to work with it, not to destroy it nor to indulge it, but to integrate it, like harnessing a powerful current of energy that carries you away if you do not understand it, yet becomes an advantage the moment you learn to direct it. And it is this ability that forms a strength rarely developed by those who are constantly supported, the ability to master yourself in any circumstance, so you are no longer pulled backward by unconscious forces, learning to comfort yourself. From an early age, you grow accustomed to seeking comfort from the outside. So when you are hurt, you need someone to listen. When you are disappointed, you wait for recognition. And when you are exhausted, you hope someone will lift you back up. But on the journey of winning in life without support, the question is no longer who will be there for you, but whether you can be there for yourself. If your entire system of comfort depends on others, then the moment you must walk alone is precisely when you become most fragile. For Jung, psychological crises do not arise only from circumstances, but from not knowing what to do with the pain within. Self-compassion is not about denying your emotions or forcing yourself to be okay, but the ability to stay with yourself without judgment and without avoidance. When you lack support, emotions such as failure, doubt, and exhaustion appear more often rather than less. If each time this happens, you only criticize yourself or force positivity, your inner world becomes a place of tension where you are both the one enduring and the one applying pressure. A common sign of this is dependence on external stimulation, where you constantly turn to your phone, motivational content, or work to escape inner discomfort. These bring temporary relief, but in the long run, they weaken your emotional regulation. Those who prevail without support can sit with a bad day without needing to fix it immediately, allowing sadness and disappointment to exist. And it is this acceptance that prevents emotions from exploding just to be noticed. As Jung once wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life." At its deepest level, self-comfort is the result of self-acceptance. When you accept that you can be weak, can be wrong, and can lose your way, you no longer need to punish yourself whenever you fall short. Comfort then comes not from empty reassurances, but from something more stable, the knowledge that no matter what happens, you do not abandon yourself. In practice, this shows up in small ways, in how you speak to yourself after a mistake, in allowing yourself to rest without guilt, and in acknowledging that today you are not okay, and that this does not make you less worthy. When these actions are repeated, you build an inner support system to replace what you do not receive from the outside. Those who cannot comfort themselves often carry a harsh inner voice, like an internalized parent that constantly judges and demands, and without external support, that voice becomes even more ruthless. So victory in life without support does not require you to always be strong, but to know how to recover, returning to care for yourself after every impact until you hold a support that cannot be taken away. Turning pain into momentum. Every person carries a form of wound within, whether from loss, rupture, or unseen failures. These pains rarely knock you down immediately, but exist quietly, seeping into your thoughts and decisions and letting you continue living with a weight difficult to name, as if an invisible force slows each step while everything outside appears normal. For Jung, pain is not a deviation of the psyche, but an essential part of the process of growth. The issue is not whether you feel pain, but what you do with it. When you avoid, numb, or deny suffering, you trap yourself in an outdated psychological structure. But when you are courageous enough to pause, observe, and engage with your pain, a process of transformation begins, and the energy once suppressed no longer works against you, but becomes a resource for rebuilding the self. As Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." What has happened cannot be changed, but how you continue to live with it is where a new self is formed. If you look more deeply, pain is not only something to overcome, but a mechanism that forces you to redefine yourself. When what you once relied on collapses, what is truly being tested is not your circumstance, but your identity. If you have defined yourself through achievement, roles, or recognition, then when those disappear, you will feel lost. Yet it is precisely in that disorientation that a fundamental question arises, that if everything which once defined you is gone, what remains? This is where many people fail in silence, not because they lack strength, but because they try to return to their old version as quickly as possible. Jung described this as unconscious resistance, when the ego clings to familiar structures even after they have collapsed. But if you are patient enough not to rush into repair and remain within the breakdown, you see that pain does not only destroy, it reorganizes your entire inner system of values. The image of the phoenix immersing itself in fire to be reborn is not merely a poetic metaphor, but an accurate description of this process, because no rebirth occurs without burning. And in that burning, what is no longer necessary is stripped away: the illusions, the dependencies, and the misplaced expectations. If you try to hold on to what is already dissolving, you only prolong the suffering. But if you allow it to end, pain becomes a necessary pressure that forms a new structure, more stable and more honest. Major turning points rarely begin with inspiration, but with hitting bottom. Some people only begin to truly live when they have nothing left to lose, and from that point, they begin again, not to prove, but to build. So the pain no longer functions as a burden, but as a quiet fuel reminding them that they have endured and are still here. When you stop resisting pain, the energy once used to avoid it is released and invested in conscious change. Those who move through crisis consciously develop a very stable inner center, because they have lost everything and still existed. Once you have touched that bottom without breaking, the fear of loss no longer controls you, and you begin to act more freely, not because success is guaranteed, but because you know you can rise again even after failure, controlling action through will rather than emotion. Thank you for staying with me until this moment, and if what I have shared has touched the hidden corners of your inner world, take a moment to like this video as a quiet way of honoring the journey you are on If you go deep enough into this journey, you will encounter a difficult truth that emotions are not designed to take you where you want to go because they reflect where you've already been. If you allow emotions to dictate your actions, you will remain trapped in old patterns guided by memory, wounds, and unresolved experiences. That is why, for Jung, maturity is not about feeling better, but about building an inner center strong enough not to be governed by inner fluctuations. At their core, emotions are responses of the unconscious, meant to signal your inner state rather than direct your life. When you confuse a signal with a command, you begin to live according to emotion, and the result is a fragmented life with actions shifting by mood, discipline, breaking on days without motivation, and direction eroded by doubt. Will, in its deepest sense, is not force, but the capacity to sustain a chosen direction even when emotion no longer aligns. It is the point where the mature ego separates from unconscious reactions and begins to function as a center of coordination. You still feel tired, afraid, and uncertain, but you no longer let those states determine whether you continue. You act not because you feel ready, but because you have decided. Here it helps to imagine emotions as waves that constantly shift, while will is the axis that keeps the ship on course. Because if you wait for the sea to become completely calm before setting sail, you will never leave the shore. What keeps that ship from breaking is not the calmness of the environment, but the strength of its internal structure. A common misunderstanding is to equate will with constant strength, when Jung spoke not of rigidity, but of consistency. Will does not demand that you exceed your limits every day, but that you do not lose your direction. There will be days when you can only do very little, yet what matters is that you do not return to zero, because that continuity, even if small, gradually builds a new psychological structure. As Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When you act on emotion without awareness, you let the unconscious shape your life in silence. But when you hold your will, you bring consciousness into the process. And you no longer call avoidance simply not being in the mood, but recognize it as a pattern to move through. Those who move forward without support are rarely those who are always energized, but those who do not let temporary states disrupt long-term structure, so they may doubt yet still continue, and feel exhausted yet do not quit. Will create something emotion never can, which is continuity. And that continuity, sustained over time, reshapes you into someone capable of acting even without motivation, building motivation from within. As external supports gradually fall away, you meet an uncomfortable truth that motivation which depends on circumstances is the most fragile form of energy. Remove a word of encouragement, a glance of recognition, or a familiar structure, and your entire rhythm of action can collapse in silence. Yet for Jung, this is not a sign of weakness, but an indication that your source of motivation has been misplaced, anchored outside instead of within. The path without support, harsh as it may be, becomes the very condition that forces a crucial transformation, shifting the center of motivation from the external world to the inner self. Jung placed motivation within individuation, the journey of becoming yourself, rather than living according to collective patterns. When motivation is tied to individuation, it does not require daily activation through praise or fear of falling behind, but functions as a quiet and steady force arising from alignment between your action and your inner nature. You do not act because you feel like it, but because not acting would mean drifting away from yourself. As Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." When becoming yourself is no longer an abstract idea, but an inner responsibility, Motivation no longer fluctuates with short-term success or failure, because failure becomes information rather than negation, and success becomes a byproduct of long-term consistency. Consider a writer I once observed who spent years being rejected, constantly advised to change in order to fit the market. At a certain point, he stopped chasing approval and continued writing, not to be published, but because stopping would mean betraying something deeply real within him. And it was precisely when he no longer needed to be seen that the value of his work began to reveal itself. Inner motivation is not something to be created, but something to be uncovered because it already exists, buried beneath noise, expectations, comparisons, and the need for recognition. The first step is not to do more, but to create space to listen to yourself again. Activities without achievement goals, such as writing, drawing, playing music, or simply doing something because you want to, help you reconnect with acting without external reasons. Silence plays a crucial role, because when you sit still without seeking stimulation, deeper signals begin to emerge, and though there may be emptiness at first, that emptiness is the condition for real motivation to form. Jung pointed out that only when consciousness stops filling every gap does the unconscious gain the chance to speak more clearly, and nature, in its quiet way, returns you to your internal rhythm without judgment. Inner motivation is built through quiet repetition, through small actions that are unseen, unrecognized, and sustained over time, until they reshape your entire system of motivation, so you no longer act to be praised, but because the action itself keeps you aligned with who you are. It exists as a steady current, quietly reminding you to keep going, because this belongs to you, and though it may not make you faster, it makes you steadier. When this foundation becomes solid enough, you realize you no longer need anyone behind you, because you have become your own greatest source of strength. Perhaps even now, you still have no one standing behind you, no one confirming that you are on the right path, and yet something far more profound is quietly taking place, because you no longer need that validation the way you once did. For Jung, true maturity begins when you stop seeking yourself in the eyes of others. And the silent journey you have just walked through is, in essence, the process of reclaiming your power from the outside and returning it within. You no longer move forward because you are supported, but because you know exactly where you are going. You no longer wait for recognition, but begin to live by a deeper inner order, where every choice bears the imprint of who you truly are. Within that stillness, a new kind of strength is formed, not loud and not performative, but deep enough that nothing can knock you off your path. In the end, victory is not found in rising above others, but in the moment you no longer have to fight against yourself. When you have walked through loneliness without collapsing and passed through darkness without turning back, you have become someone who can stand firmly on their own inner foundation, carrying that victory as a lasting force throughout a lifetime. If this journey resonated with you, share it with someone who has also been walking without support for far too long, and subscribe to keep exploring these deeper layers of yourself, because this path was never about becoming someone else, but about finally learning to stand on your own.